Good evening, Professor Khaitan. We're very happy to welcome you for this interview with Law and Other Things, a blog that you were also associated with and a part of. As most of our viewers know, Professor Khaitan is a professor of public law and legal theory at and the Hackney Fellow at law or in law at Wadham College, Oxford. He's also a future fellow at the University of Melbourne and a visiting global professor of law at NYU Law School. Today, we will talk to Professor Khaitan about his journey in academic writing, research in India, and one of the recent initiatives that he has been involved with, the Junior Faculty Forum, which provides young Indian law scholars a platform to workshop, discuss, and receive feedback on their papers. So, Professor Khaitan, you've obviously written a lot, and I think all of our audience has had the good fortune to read one or the other piece by you. I think for some, and like all of these pieces have been something that every reader has had an opportunity to think deeply about public law through them. I think for both Vishal and me, it was your piece in the Oxford Handbook on Indian Constitution regarding the Article 14. So what we really wanted to start with was to start talking about your journey as a writer, how you felt your personal writing grow, and what has helped you improve your writing.
Well, thanks first to Dayaar and Vishal, and through you to the Law and Other Things blog, which I have had indeed the pleasure of being associated with for a very long time. I was on its editorial board for an inordinately long period and gave it up only after I could not manage those duties with the Indian Law Review duties as its general editor. So it's a pleasure to talk to you and a pleasure to re-engage with the blog again, albeit in a different capacity. My journey as an academic writer, I think it began with an internship during my undergraduate years with the MKSS, which is Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan. Some of you might know, it's a union of farmers and laborers in rural Rajasthan. And among others, run by Aruna Roy. I was in the second year of my undergraduate law degree, and I remember distinctly sitting in this little mud hut where Aruna is sort of bent over a chulha, a wood stove, making rotis for us, all the interns. I think there were 5 of us, and simultaneously quizzing us about what we wanted to do in life. And I told her that I was thinking of the academy as an option. And in a very characteristic Aruna style, she sort of thought about it for a moment and then told me, I'm paraphrasing, I think she said something along the lines of, yes, the democracy needs its scholars, but make sure you write in a way that is accessible, right, that the people can understand. And I think that was an important lesson, and a lesson that stuck in many ways. So I believe the key motivation for writing are both captured in what she said. A democracy needs its scholars. I've thought for long about why a democracy needs its scholars, and I think the academy is part of a system of checks and balances in any democracy, right? With the media, we are the truth-telling institution. We discover different types of truths. The media looks for more obvious on its surface truths, and the academy tries to discover more deep-rooted, unclear truths which require longer time. And truth is essential for a democracy to function. And accessibility and clear communication is key to being a good scholar. I think that being obscure and in requiring a further interpretation of what you might be saying is disservice to the truth-seeking function of scholarship. So I would say that was probably where my journey as an academic began.
So, and how do you see yourself as in terms of your writing improving over time, or because at least what Vishal and I have felt that everyone, all of us do try to write as simple as possible, but you really get to know only when someone else reads your work if that is actually simple for the reader. And that's where, at least to me, feedback has really helped. And I was, looking at your first session at the Junior Faculty Forum, the video that we had with Professor Mohsin Bhatt's paper, and he also sort of talked about how he had the opportunity to workshop his paper multiple times, and he tried to simplify it, but sometimes those simplifications led to greater complexities. So, how do you see the platform, or such as JFF, or generally any other platform workshopping, helping papers to improve their writing, only be in simpler manners or in clearly expressing their ideas?
Yeah, see, good writing is a skill that is continuously honed. It's a lifetime's work. Um, some people move in the opposite direction. I've read scholars who actually wrote quite clearly when they were younger and were seduced by certain schools of writing uh, in their more mature years and became unintelligible or incoherent. So, well, one hope is that one is not moving in the wrong direction. Um, the second thought is that, as you say, workshopping is really important, both for improving the substantive ideas you're discussing in the paper and its communication. How clearly are you coming across? And there is a process of um, becoming a voice that speaks not to the self. So one of the tropes of being an early career scholar is that um, well, usually people who get into the academy tend to be very clever people. Um, and a lot of the things in whatever they are working on are relatively obvious to them. So they don't often understand really what needs to be explained, because things that they take for granted as obvious may not be obvious to an intelligent reader in a different field. So the process of learning to write well is also the process to be able to shift the point of view, the gaze of uh, of articulating your thoughts. So, of course, as a scholar, you have to think about what you want to say, and what you're saying is robust and sound and based on evidence and defensible and justified and all of that. But then there is a process of distancing yourself, getting out of your head and seeing what you want to say from the point of view of the audience that you want to communicate to. That is a difficult process, and that takes time, and it can be honed throughout. As a doctoral student, I remember sending a chapter to another mentor, Professor Denise Rayom from Toronto, and she she wasn't my supervisor. She owed me nothing, but as a precocious young student, then I just took my chances, sent it to her, and said, "Could you give me some comments?" She very kindly invited me to coffee in a cafe and pulled this sheet of paper out. It was my printed article, and there were more marginal notes in red than probably the printed black ink. And that was one of the most helpful and useful things I did as a growing scholar, because a lot of her comments. So of course, she gave me fantastic substantive criticism of how I could improve that paper, which incidentally became the paper on dignity that was published in the Oxford Journal in 2012. But she also gave me a lot of insights about writing well. And so yeah, mentorship, people who have discovered it themselves are invaluable to this process. And there's just no reason why everybody should reinvent the wheel, right? If I've learned some skills the hard way, it's incumbent upon me to pass on those skills to others without having, there's just no sense in discovering it by trial and error over a long time. And mentorship is really useful here.
So you spoke about how someone helped you in writing, the professor helped you in writing. Uh, I remember I sent an article to the ILR, and you sent me a philosophy guide in terms of helping me improve my writing. Is there any specific material apart from this that you think helps people write on topics?
Look, we are trying to put together a bunch of different guides um, to writing. One thing I should be clear about, which is this, right? There is no one way to write well. There are many different styles. There are many different approaches. You will find your own voice over time. There are many bad ways to write, right? So saying that there are many good ways to write does not mean that every way is acceptable, right? And basically the goal is this: writing, reading time is at premium, in especially in our times, short attention spans, so much reading ability and availability. You know, when I was growing up in a small town in India, this is the pre-internet days, there was nothing to read, right? There were no library books. There were, you know, apart from school books and the daily newspaper, there was really very little. I remember, you know, sitting down for breakfast and reading the instructions or whatever the recipes on the cereal box, to buying things in newspaper packets and reading what, you know, you were just so starved of reading that you read whatever came your way, right? The world has changed completely, where TLDR is sort of all too common. So you have to earn your readers belief that reading you will be worth her time, and that means being kind to the reader and being easy to read, and also telling the reader upfront why she should invest the time it will take. If it's an article, half a day; if it's a book, perhaps a week; if it's a blog post, maybe sort of 15-20 minutes. Whatever it is, you have to earn that privilege to be read. You can't take it for granted anymore. The reading sphere is very crowded. Um, and part of what good writing means is that, right, the ability to get your readers trust that that the time spent with you will be worthwhile.
Um, so, in terms of beginning the writing process, so when I say discover a topic that seems really interesting to me, how how do I approach it in terms of starting it? So when I start writing, I am always I'm always confused as to how I should start thinking about this topic, how I should approach the structure of the paper, because what I'm thinking in terms of what the paper should be is very different from what the ideas I have about the topic. So it's difficult to reconcile these two for me sometimes. So I was wondering if you could give a
Yeah. Look, the so okay. So here's the thought. I think at the undergraduate level, um, your writing goals should be different from your writing goals as a research student and then as an academic. Um, and I mean this kindly, so don't let this put you or any of your audiences off. But there are two parts to academic writing, right? The first part is what we have been discussing so far, the soft skills, right? By soft, I don't mean unimportant, right? I really don't think that. But part of it is being easy to read. Uh, but the main point of academic writing is creating and disseminating new knowledge. Um, right? That's the point of our profession, our vocation as scholars. And even the most precocious undergraduate student, you know, the cleverest and hardest working student, um, will struggle to say things that are genuinely interesting and novel and insightful and deep about the law. There is a process of um, synthesis and seeing the bigger pictures, and these are things that just years and experience and the doctoral process, the supervised process of writing and thinking um, gets you to. That is simply, to my mind, I wouldn't say impossible, but next to impossible as an undergraduate student. I think that as an undergraduate student, the skills you should be seeking to master um, are skills of clear writing and argumentation. So, so rather than churning out or trying to write research papers, um, I think the first sort of duty of an undergraduate student should be to um, read material that is worthwhile, and to imbibe it and to think about it and to digest it and to discuss it with your peers, and discuss it both on its substantive arguments and its style, right? When you have your reading groups, think about how easy a particular piece was to read. And when you're trying out writing, I'm not saying don't try out writing, but write essays, right? Write essays, uh, short pieces, around 2,000 words, trying to communicate an argument, sort of honing your soft skills, figuring out how an argument can be defended, must be defended, how you must comprehensively research that particular topic, how you have to be kind and generous to the opposition, that you're not trying to convince me to join your political party, right? As a scholar, your job is not to persuade, your job is to discover the truth and to present it in the most accessible form, right? So keeping an open mind, right? Being open to changing your mind. All of these sort of intellectual humility is probably the most important virtue of a scholar. So picking up those soft skills so that, if you start a research degree down the line, you can hit the ground running, and your supervisor will be quite pleased. As doctoral supervisors, we end up spending a lot of time teaching some basic skills that, frankly, undergraduate education should have done. It's clear to me that most Indian law schools, this is not a comment on the two of you, but having read enough material from undergraduate students, um, it's an irony that Indian law schools get you to write a lot. At least in my undergraduate years, I wrote 60 papers over 5 years. But it doesn't seem to be getting anywhere. There's hardly a process that incrementally builds upon your writing skills. And the volume may be part of the problem, right? Given how much is being churned out by students in your project work, that the teachers don't have the time to read. I think it'll be much better to have a system of 5 papers or even 2 papers in 5 years, but papers that are genuinely engaged with by a senior academic, by your professor who gives you good feedback. I think that'll be more worthwhile for you and for the professor's time in terms of teaching you how to write than 60 papers that are skimmed through. So I hope that's not offensive, but I really think, this is the time to learn. This is not the time to teach.
No, thank you. That was really helpful. So, in terms of actually what goes into making a good paper, so even as an undergraduate, I'm still trying to figure this out. And like you said, we don't get these skills here. So, what kind of aspects are necessary for a good paper to have, according to you?
So when I'm looking at an article, at a manuscript, I mainly think of 5 key things. So the first issue that I'm really interested in a journal article is, what's its thesis? What is the point of this paper, right? What's the research question? One article is one argument. sometimes early career scholars, you have so much to say, right? And you have spent between 5 to 10 years sort of held back in school, and now finally is your chance to give voice to all these ideas that have been simmering, bubbling away, right? And one of the biggest pathologies of early career scholar papers is that they put everything clever they've ever thought of in one paper. That's a mistake, right? There will be time. Take it easy. One paper is one idea, not everything, right? So depth is definitely better than breadth in terms of scope of the paper. Uh, is it a question that needs answering? Uh, is it a sharp question? Is it a precise question? Is it a question that can be answered? And what is your answer? Is it a plausible answer? Is it an interesting answer? Is it not? So there's the first thing that I look for in a paper. And you'll be surprised by how many papers we get which either don't have an argument or have an argument that the reader has to do excavation work to unearth. And that's already lost my interest, right? Because that will take so much work to figure out. It's just not worth publishing. So that's the first thing. The second thing I look for in a paper, beyond the sharp question and the answer you give to it, is its knowledge base, right? So have you actually done the toil? Have you done the hard work? Have you looked at all the relevant material on the topic? Anything that you have not, I will send it back to you and say, look, there's this important piece missing. And here, one of the biggest pathologies, in part because of how our system of education has come to be, which is you do your undergraduate at an Indian law school, and then you go to the US or the UK to do a master's degree. And this is more common in people to do their LLMs in the US, which is we'll often get papers which take an Indian problem, just pick up an American framework and apply it without any further thought. Look, I'm a comparative lawyer, and I have certainly no allergy to comparative law, but this is comparative law really badly done, right? A, there is no effort to find out what the Indian scholarship or the Indian doctrinal law even on the matter is. B, there is no case made for why the US, well, whether this paper needs comparative law, and if it does, why the US might be the best case to compare with. Why are you doing this, right? So this is derivative applied scholarship, which is mostly pointless, and they are sent back to authors usually. So that's a huge problem with a lot of the papers that we get from early career scholars, but some late career scholars as well. So again, completely uncompromising in our attitude to comprehensiveness of research. And within it is also a methodological question that's embedded, which is, if your question is empirical, say your question is, how long does the Supreme Court on average take in deciding an SLP, right? And your method is analytic. An analytic method cannot usually answer an empirical question, right? Or if your question is comparative, conceptual, but you're trying to do ethnography, right? So the method must be dictated by the question. They have to fit. The method must be able to answer that question. And obviously you have to have the expertise in the method, you have to have the disciplinary rigor. And these are all sort of things that form the analytic side, the third criterion, which is how good is your critical analytic ability? Can you think through the pros and cons of an argument? Can you think of the opposition in the literature? If there isn't one, can you preempt? Can you think of what are the plausible arguments against you? Read those arguments generously, right? So you treat the opposition generously, take their strongest points, engage with them sincerely, right? Do the steps in your argumentation in fact lead to the conclusion? or not, right? So one issue I have with Oxford undergraduate essays is, they're given a question, they will argue something else in the body, and then by the time they reach the conclusion, they will suddenly remind themselves of, oh, this was the question, right? And then suddenly they'll produce a conclusion out of thin air, but the main body of the essay has no bearing on that conclusion, right? So the conclusion is a response to the actual question asked, but most of the essay isn't. So, do the argumentative steps neatly follow each other? All of these are sort of the third criterion. So we have the question asked, we have the structure, which is readability. No, we have comprehensiveness of knowledge. We have analytic skills. Fourth, the structure and communication. Did you tell the reader what your destination is? Do you show them the roadmap, your argumentative steps by which you'll take them there? Do you follow that roadmap? Do you, flag at various points, signpost what you have told the reader, why you are telling the reader, where you will take them from now, how this leads naturally to the next step? So well-rounded, easy to read paper, even if, your audience must be a tired, extremely busy, academic with multiple demands on their time, and will that person find this easy to read? Not easy in terms of substance, right? But easy to read. So that's the fourth thing I look for. And finally, originality, right? Are you contributing to the literature? Or there's no point. So you can write essays as an undergraduate to try out ideas, and those essays need not be novel, right? But if you are writing something for publication in print, there's no point writing it unless you're contributing to the literature. What is the gap in scholarship that you're seeking to fill, right? Why do we need to publish this? Right? Is our collective understanding of this topic going to be enhanced because this piece exists in print? And those are the 5 main things that I look for in a good paper.
So maybe these are things that people who are submitting to JFF will find important as guideline.
So I should just say about the JFF, the Junior Faculty Forum is basically an idea that I've been toying for a long time, and in part because of my editorial experience at the Indian Law Review, that there isn't a workshopping culture in most Indian law schools. I believe that there are experiments and attempts happening in some places. But even when things are being tried out, it's very rare to have a workshopping culture where the paper is pre-read. And sort of the skills of good writing and nuanced argumentation are really only developed when your discussants, your commentators have read the paper before. So listening to a lecture and getting comments based on that will never come close to the quality of feedback you will get when everybody in the room has read the paper. So the idea of the Junior Faculty Forum for Indian Law Teachers is to workshop papers by Indian law faculty who presumably don't have workshopping opportunities in their home institutions, where there's only one rule for attendance. You have to have read the paper before. If you haven't read the paper, don't come, right? The second, well, I say there's only one rule. That's the one rule for attendance. And there is a second rule for intervention, for making a comment, which is that the point of an intervention is not for the intervener, for the questioner, for the commentator to show to everyone how clever they are. The point is to give good, kind, high quality, robust, but generous feedback to the author, right? The point is to make the paper as good as it can be, but with kindness, with generosity. I've seen enough workshops where people are unnecessarily rude and unkind to each other, and that can really damage the self-confidence of early career academics. So those are the two sort of twin objectives: constructive but robust criticism.
Thank you for bringing out the objectives of JFF. And on that point, I also wanted to, you talked about how writing as an individual and how do you go about it. But I also wanted to sort of take your time to talk about the institutional support and the role that plays towards being an academic or generally towards writing. You finished your undergraduate degree at National Law School, as you mentioned, and you've also stayed closely associated with Indian scholarship, both with this JFF and previously through the Indian Law Review, as well as your equality law program at Melbourne Law School. So what I wanted to ask, because you're someone who has had the sort of opportunity to stay closely associated, but also be an external observer towards the Indian academia. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think can either universities do, or what generally do you see are the problems that are existing in the Indian research ecosystem, and what do you think can be done towards this to provide better opportunities to younger law faculties?
It's a very difficult question uh, and a very difficult problem. It requires a multi-pronged approach. So I should preface my answer by saying that I know that there are many people in India who are trying to fix this and trying to fix this sincerely, right? But this is a huge systemic problem, and it's not going to go away overnight. Part of the problem is capacity and supply of good scholars. Part of the problem is that most of the national law universities, NLUs, are basically largely oriented towards giving a vocational qualification, a qualifying law degree to make lawyers who can practice. Right? Although most of them are deemed universities, they are not universities in the real sense, because universities are places which don't really focus on vocational skills. They generate and disseminate knowledge, right? And question knowledge and critique it and advance it. So if research work isn't happening at universities, then I think it's stretching the meaning of the word university to call it that. So robust postgraduate and doctoral programs are what make a place a university, and that is really lacking in most Indian law schools. In part, it's a capacity problem. There are just not enough people within law schools who are interested in research for historical reasons. The structures have never incentivized doing research until recently. It's never mattered for career progression, whether you do research. But to my mind, most importantly, the manner in which teaching and administration is organized in most NLUs makes research next to impossible for faculty. The amount of contact hours that every academic has with students is mind-boggling. It's astonishingly high compared to any functional university system. I don't think it does the students any favor either to have this regime of daily lectures, 2 exams every term, a midterm and an end term, and the project work. So you're basically the slog of lecturing and marking is never ending. And if you students are interested in seeking to change that culture, you have to demand a change in the teaching style that leaves academics some time to write and to think and to workshop, right? There is, after I would not be producing anything in that system, and I don't imagine, there are a few brave souls who do that. I don't know how their days probably have 36 hours, but it's really difficult. And it also encourages a system of learning which is based on spoon feeding. I don't know if that still goes on. In my days, there were 4 people in every class, or maybe 2, who would take copious notes of everything the lecturer said. And a week before the exam, photocopies would be made of those notes, and everybody just read those notes a week before. So it's not like anybody's paying attention except those 4 note takers of every class, right? You have to move away from this sort of extremely intensive but pointless uh, manner of teaching, which wastes your time, which wastes the teacher's time. I think 1 day a week based on um, actual work done by you, hours spent in the library doing your own reading, maybe producing something sensible before you go to see your teacher, where you can't hide and they can't hide. That's a much more promising way to teach and a much better use of their time than the current system permits. And research will also happen a lot better in the system. So that's the sort of the structural problem exists as well. The third problem is the changing political climate in India, where increasingly academic freedom has come under pressure in ways that were unimaginable even a decade ago. And self-censorship has become a real thing. And I don't think any system of scholarship can thrive if scholars have to worry about what they are saying and how and where and to whom.
Yeah. On the note of you mentioning how the system is rigorous, but sort of pointlessly so in a manner, and you mentioned in your one of your previous answers about how.
Demanding.
Sorry.
It's demanding. It's not
Yeah.
rigorous.
Yeah. All right. And in one of your previous answers, you mentioned how students are asked, sort of writing 60 papers, but there's no sort of there's no feedback on that per se. And how do you see Indian universities not just improving scholarly output, which of course the answer is, as you mentioned, to improve capacity and improve research output, but also to ensure the students growing as better writers? Not, of course, as you mentioned, that undergraduate is not probably the time to write, but to provide them, as you mentioned, that like there's a lot of things that you believe should be taught in the undergraduate program but is not taught. Where do you see that, or like what can be done?
Indian LNUs have a really valuable resource, which is that they're highly selective. They're probably more selective than any other system in the world. Just given India's size, given the number of people who apply and the places that are available, um, any half meritocratic system of selection would largely pick very clever people. Um, that is not in doubt, right? It's clear that the system sort of works. There are huge access and equity issues in the system, but it broadly gets that um, more or less right. The problem is with what is done to that talent that comes through the law school gates, and a more targeted, a more focused, a more individualized way of teaching how to write, which necessarily will mean a dramatic reduction in volume. So as I said previously, you know, like the 5 criteria I just mentioned earlier in the interview to you, clever people don't need very long to be taught how to write. These criteria are, once you hear them, they seem so obvious. There are enough guides available online. If you have a workshopping culture, imagine you had a workshopping culture in your faculty where a faculty member circulated a draft paper weekly or fortnightly, and the entire faculty gathered, pre-read to critique it, right? How could you not learn how to write by participating in those workshops? I think, the 60 projects in 5 years should be cut down to, I don't know, at the most 5. research essays over 5 years, and no more than 2,000 words each. I think fewer will suffice as well. The issue is not how many you do, but if you do 2 or 3 papers that are well written, and then you get individualized feedback in a way that's possible for the faculty member to give, right? So you don't write papers for every topic. Maybe every year in law school, you have to choose one course where you will do maybe half the course work, half the course's sort of credit as a written paper. Right? It's your choice, and the weight will be distributed. You can even sort of do quotas so that the weight is distributed evenly between faculty. So first come, first serve. You have to make choices, and every subject has like, say, 10 spaces of whatever is the quota you need to distribute the weight equally, right? Sign up to it, write a supervised paper, which the faculty member can mark, and then give you individual comments on writing skills. There can be, you know, some people hired just for teaching if the faculty is, if the regular faculty is just overwhelmed, 1 or 2 just research coordinators or people who can do writing workshops who you can go to and get sort of 15-minute or one-to-one time. I think that'll be time much better spent, both the student time and the academic time. It's the current system of project works, I don't think is, it's also bad for the environment. I think, I don't know if you've moved to online submission, but all that paper, if you're still printing it, I don't think it's serving any cause.
Thankfully, on one point we moved to Turnitin, so at least on the paper we are good. But what the content on the paper is is probably a good question which still remains. Just another thing, that because we're talking about Indian law schools, and you've been part of the Indian, like you've been someone who's been so closely associated with the Indian Law Review, and as you obviously know, that all these law schools have a multiple student journals which are generally, which have little to none faculty association with them. So and some have really grown well as well, which I do think are the result of closer faculty supervision and association. So how do you see journals in India, and especially student-led journals, and if you were to advise them, how would you advise them so that they can, uh, as at least students as editors, what role they can play, and how can they grow better? Because what you mentioned, the 5 points, are something which probably no one even teaches them to look for as even when they're playing editorial roles, which probably shouldn't be the case in the first place. But how do you see that area specifically?
I'm going to be rude again here, and again, it's not targeted at the two of you. I just don't think it's the best use of undergraduate students' time to run a student journal. And it's not about your talents as individuals. You are simply not at a stage to make those. This is basically uh, borrowed from a pathological American law school experience. Uh, other disciplines don't have student-run journals, right? The system of peer review requires a review of other established experts in the field. That is the gold standard for academic publishing. American law schools, for their own bizarre historical reasons, have student-run journals. And while one could make an argument for journals run by doctoral students aimed at research student writing, I really don't see any argument for undergraduate students spending their time running journals. I really think that those are not spaces where academics should be sending their articles. Those are not spaces where students should be putting in their time and efforts into writing. And I don't know what the motivation is. I'm sure part of the motivation is, an interest in the academy, in scholarship. And that, I've said it many times now, is best nurtured by reading and then reading and then reading a bit more and discussing and talking and thinking about it and doing a little bit of writing, but not with a view to publishing. And I'm sure there are other more strategic motivations of building up a CV, and there are plenty of other ways where you can do that more fruitfully, which is a better use of your time than running a student journal. So again, I don't mean to be harsh, but I just um, you know I just don't think it's the best use of your time.
So both of us are also part of LAOT. So I think in that sense, we do perform a similar role as a journal. But I think here we have we act as more as a filtration process to reach the senior editors. So in that sense, it's different from an academic paper, because in an academic paper you're that much more deeply engaged with the subject. But how do you think blogs work in this format, and what should we as editors look for in a blog piece?
Yeah, blogs are different, and law blogs, I think, can play a useful and supplementary role to journals. I have frequently written blog posts based on half-baked ideas that are not quite ready to commit to a journal in print, but ideas that are interesting, ideas that I want to try out as a thought balloon, see what my peers think about it, ideas that I want to put out quickly, um, ideas that I want to, space that I want to use to comment on other people's work without having to write a full review or a response. So blogs can be an extremely useful supplement to academic writing, as long as they are self-conscious um, about their role as building upon and helping uh, scholarly publications. So you have both a pre-publication role and a post-publication role. You have very good forums for trying out ideas that later become journal articles. And I know a lot of ideas are first tried out as blog posts these days. And once the papers are published, so the iConnect blog, I mentioned it to you guys in an email, does this with the ICON journal, right? The Journal of Constitutional, International Journal of Constitutional Law, which is post-publication, invite other authors, other experts in the field to comment on papers published by a journal, right? So there are both ways in which you're furthering scholarship, you're helping scholarship without sort of, um, seeing or viewing journal publishing as a threat. And that, I think, can be suitably handled by students with proper oversight or supervision, as I believe is the case with law and other things. But yeah, so that's, I believe the second role that blogs should seek to perform, and and also social media accounts, so the ILR Twitter account, for example, tries to do this, which is to disseminate information about opportunities. In our unequal world, access to opportunities, access to information about opportunities itself is so asymmetric that just making whatever you find out about, because once you become a hub, once you become a network, information finds its way to you, and then it's your duty to broadcast it, to let others know, and then make use of that information. I think that blogs can perform that role as well, of call for papers, information about conferences, fellowships, jobs, uh, scholarships, things like that. So those are things that a journal can't really do, but blogs can really well.
So you spoke about how there are specific ideas that you look for, specific aspects that you look for in a research paper. What should we look for in a blog piece? So when we're reviewing it, we always have this problem deciding what kind of piece we should publish. because sometimes there's no novelty, or sometimes it's extremely descriptive. So this is something we've been trying to understand. What would you say we should look for in this?
So the threshold would certainly be lower uh, for screening a blog post. So I would not insist on comprehensive research, because if the author had to do that, why would they publish a blog post? Why wouldn't they write a fully fledged piece? I think a descriptive piece can be valuable, even if it lacks an argument, especially in a country like India, where we don't even have good quality basic textbooks in most areas of law. So a descriptive piece which, say, puts together the key cases in an area of law that is not well known is valuable, and a blog can do that. In fact, the Indian Law Review also has a conspectus section where we publish things which would basically be book chapters. So they don't have argument, they're putting material together, but in the Indian context where we don't have good textbooks, that can be useful. So I would apply different standards, but you still have to pass some threshold of scholarly interest. On whether this is new or not as an idea, I guess there's a different consideration for blogs in particular, to some extent for the notes section of a journal as well, for case notes and legislative notes, but often reacting to new developments just means applying pre-existing frameworks and ideas to a new issue. And that may not be particularly insightful, but that is still helpful, especially to the activist and policy world. And blogs are a good vehicle to do that, because, so that's basically translation work done by lawyers for non-lawyers who are interested in understanding the issue. So how does, for example, the jurisprudence on discrimination apply to the Citizenship Amendment Act, right? Now, intellectually, at least as far as I'm concerned, that's a clear-cut issue, right? There is no, it's as close. I'm not a Dworkinian who thinks in one right answer thesis terms, but it's as close a case as one can possibly find to one right answer. Like, how could anybody think that Article 15 is not breached by the Citizenship Amendment Act? So there's very little scholarly value in that argument, but because of the salience, the political importance of the issue, blogs should certainly carry a piece making that claim. And I believe journals probably should as well, at least as legislative notes. But for a research article on the Citizenship Amendment Act, for example, I would demand something more novel, that doesn't just tell us, oh, given what we know, this is wrong, but also has some insights.
I think to that extent, Law and Other Things collaborating with JFF will provide a good platform to announce the speakers and also provide summaries for these arguments. How do you envisage JFF growing in terms of workshopping? Do you see this growing in terms of each law school having one, or simply that JFF also becomes one of the many places that people can go to?
Look, I think how it grows will depend on who joins it and takes ownership of it. I'm clear that I don't want to do this for life, right? It's an institution that I'm building. I don't want to do Indian Law Review for life. I think it's bad for institutions when people who are founders stick around for too long. Institutions have to have a way of self-renewal and growth. I also think that, so there's a fine line between, you don't want to leave too early because the institution should become sustainable. And I think any renewal in personnel should be staggered rather than everybody who started it leaves at the same time. So they're fine sort of um, issues to be balanced. But JFF, I see my role with the JFF as an advisor, and even that as a time limited role, or at least as an engaged advisor as a time limited role. We have three excellent conveners who are very enthusiastic. Jai Prakash, Meena, Animesh Das, and Swati Singh. And they both do a lot of work in the background. But so look, eventually, of course, a workshopping space in some ways more the merrier. But you also don't want to end up with a system where there's so many workshops that sort of workshop fatigue sets in. But certainly one in every institution is the minimum you would hope and expect. And JFF can then be sort of one pan-Indian workshopping space where you're not controlled by your institutional boundaries. But I think that a junior faculty forum has many other possibilities to evolve and to grow as a forum for junior faculty teaching in Indian law schools, because they have a lot of other issues they can make common cause on, not just paper workshop. So I already mentioned workload issues, right? Teaching in an Indian law school, especially as an early career scholar, is a nightmare. It's extremely demanding. I have no doubt that it leads to, and I know it for a fact that it leads to many mental health issues. It is usually precarious because our universities have moved to a system of contract based hires rather than guaranteeing academic security and therefore academic freedom. The pay is better than it used to be, but still nowhere near where it should be. It's gendered, it's much harder for women. Academic freedom is often an issue. You have directives from the academic management, for the institutional management, about what you can and cannot say. And that's becoming, so there are so many issues in which the forum can become a union for early career scholars who can make common cause and use this space to think about what they need to. And as I said at the start of the interview, universities are essential for a democracy. So they're not doing this for themselves. They're doing this for the future of our democracy, and this is hugely important. So I see the forum as having all of these possibilities, but how it gets used will depend on the people who sign up to it. The first meeting was quite encouraging. We had many people who showed up. I think a majority was still made up of doctoral students and master students in various institutions, India and abroad. Hopefully that will begin to change and we'll have more buy-in from early career scholars. But it's just the first, so it's hard. It's still early days, right? We need to wait and watch.
On that note, we would like to thank you, Professor Khaitan, for taking time out and giving us a lot to think about in terms of how our universities can improve, and also how we can personally improve in terms of our writing. We would also like to congratulate you on being a part of the Junior Faculty Forum, which we think is an extremely important initiative and will be extremely useful for junior faculty to collaborate and organize themselves better and to resolve all the issues that you speak about. We will also be, so in that sense, we'd really like to thank you so much.
It's been a real pleasure talking to both of you, Dayaar and Vishal, and thanks for the opportunity. And I wish you all the best for whatever it is that you decide to do in life.
Thank you, Professor Khaitan.